I'm here for another episode of Reflections, and my guest for this one is going to be PPD, most famously the captain of the Evil Geniuses team, but he's actually now become the CEO. So I think one of the first CEOs I've had on this series, certainly, especially who was an actual ex-pro player. So I know every story to do with PPD, every article, every like long-form interview always starts with the time when you were playing in HoN. And understandably so, because obviously it contains some of the threads that are kind of like significant for the rest of your career. But one of the things I've noticed people always pinpoint as the main thing from HoN is they always try to say that you were like, basically they just make it out like you were a complete asshole. Like you're just too aggressive, or you were just, drama seemed to surround you. What is your memory of that?
Well, I think a lot of that is probably true. For the most part, I think everyone was a little bit more of an asshole back then because everything was way less professional, and there was like tons of like personal vendettas and drama and all the good things that we miss and love in esports.
I once saw you make a comment on this where you implied that like someone asked you along the lines of like, why did you become, like a more professional person in Dota 2? And I realized in your AMAs you were fairly glib, you give short answers. Your answer was just sort of like, because Dota 2 required me to be, and it almost like implied as though like that's like if you think of the way the two scenes were back then, HoN wasn't that big a game compared to some of the other games. Was it the case that it was more like people just played for bragging rights and stuff back then? Was that why ego was a big thing, do you think?
Ego was a huge thing back then. I mean, we streamed all of our scrims, like literally every day we were streaming scrims and streaming in-house leagues, and you heard all of the audio from everyone from every angle. So there were so many like storylines, and if you said any little thing, all the fans misinterpreted 100 different ways and gets taken to every single possible direction. So it was just an explosive time for, I guess, like drama to be, I don't know, just like getting out of control.
Okay, so there's another aspect, right, which is there's different types of, nowadays people use that term toxicity, which I despise, so I'm not going to use that term, but in terms of like people who have personalities that are more difficult to get along with or aren't as easygoing, these are like the euphemisms I'll use. There's two different types for me. Like there's the person who trash talks like the opponent, that's one thing, that happens certainly. And then there's the people who have problems within teams they're in themselves, like them and teammates don't get along. And I saw that like towards the end of your HoN time, some of your ex-teammates actually were like pretty brutal about some of the things they said. Like some of them were literally like, I would never be in a room with him, even if I was paid to be again, like even if they were like, fantastic player, yeah, great guy, like, but it sounded pretty harsh. So the question I had in that sense was, if I had to guess as an outsider, if we look at your career and how you came into the HoN scene a bit later, and then how you had to come into Dota 2 later on than some people, and you've had to battle all your way, you seem to fit into the stereotype of the kind of person where, since you're like trying to become the best yourself and you're very demanding, sometimes maybe you like demand too much of others, or at least more than they think's reasonable. Am I being too generous there? What's your take?
No, I think that's all right. That's an all right kind of assumption to make. I do expect a lot of people, but I don't think I've ever really expected so much of someone that they weren't able to do it. I think I like to think I'm pretty fair about my expectations.
Do you think with some of those teammates, they were mainly like the Swedish ones I noticed, do you think there was like a culture clash that they just couldn't handle someone who's like in their face in that sense?
Not so much, because I've had issues with other people, that aren't like, European or Swedish or whatever. Like I've always just had a very strong personality. I'm kind of the person who doesn't beat around the bush. I kind of just like say it how it is, maybe a little like yourself. And I just always valued winning over everything else, and maybe I wasn't the best, kind of my interpersonal skills weren't totally developed, or maybe they still aren't today.
Okay. So you once made a joke along those lines where someone said, like, how do you motivate your teammates? Because obviously, like, the different sides of captainship, you're doing the drafting, maybe you're, like, the leader in game, doing shot calling. But in terms of, like, the motivational aspect, you, again, in kind of a glib PPD fashion, you just said something like as though you had, like, a set amount, as though it was, like, a flow chart. You were like, oh, yeah, nice try, like, first game of the day, like, as though you almost were reading from a script. Have you improved in that area?
You know what? Like, I've been playing like Dota at a level for like 2 years where pretty much anything that wasn't first place was a huge disappointment. So being able to just kind of throw off some whatever excuse at a shitty loss from time to time is totally fine and acceptable for everyone. Everyone, the more I played with the same kind of group of guys that I was playing with, the better we got at losing, which is a really tough thing to do in esports for a lot of teams and players. But I think that the best way to kind of lead and show motivation is to lead by example. And sometimes I think maybe post TI5 was when that was the weakest, because kind of like that post TI5 curse where you grow a little complacent and losing gets easier and easier. But I think that I have done a decent job of when I need to motivate my teammates, I show them by putting the extra effort into our games and like our strategies and drafting and planning for tournaments.
Okay, so one of the things about this in terms of like how driven you are or how much you want to win is that it's one thing if that manifests when someone is at the level where, like they're at world championship level and they've already won, I can understand why people who become winners, like becomes an obsession, and the idea you don't want to go back down a second. But it sounds like some of the seeds of that were already there in your HoN career, I mean, it sounds like to even get to a good level in HoN, you were like killing yourself, you're just playing all day long, you were like rescheduling things. Some of your teammates implied you almost like gave up your whole life to try and be the best at HoN. Is this accurate?
It's a little bit accurate. I was still going to school full time when I was playing HoN for like the first year or two that I was playing it. It wasn't until I joined Complexity that I literally stopped going to school, so that way I could just travel and go to tournaments. But yeah, like I definitely spent the better half of my college years just in my room, just playing games. And I always tell people like, people say like, oh, I got super lucky and I didn't really have to give up anything to get here. And I kind of just, in the back of my head, like I accept that I'm very lucky and very humble for what I have. But I also remember those like 2 to 3 years where I didn't do anything with my life except stay in my room and play video games. And I was super disconnected from everyone in my community. I pretty much like lost all of my friends that I had made from high school. And I was just kind of in my own world and in this video game.
I mean, in that sense, like, were you someone who had like a sense of destiny driving them? Like, put it this way, if you hadn't have succeeded, would you just have been like a loser who just spent 5 years playing and never made it? Would you really have kept going?
Well, I was always pushing myself to become more and more competitive and move on to whether it was just like high-ranking matchmaking into in-house leagues, into finding guys and playing in tournaments. I was always pushing myself to get better and better, and that was something I had done my entire childhood of playing games with my best friend Ben, who actually showed me all these new games via his older brothers. So we were always playing together and pushing each other farther and farther. So that was like very natural for me to do. Like I said, I was still going to school. I was still passing classes and getting my degree. And if I wouldn't have gone professional and I wasn't traveling to tournaments and making money, then I imagine I would have finished my degree and hopefully not been, I would have had something to show for.
So in light of like the drama stuff that happened in HoN, one interesting storyline I picked out was when you were with this team, which became Trademark Esports, and then they kicked you in this really crazy fashion where it was like the day where like all the flights were being booked to go to DreamHack or something like that. And then like we won't get into the minutiae of it because people aren't going to care about the fact that like what you did on a website there and then what people's response were. But the interesting part is I noticed you were then basically battling against them at the tournaments in the future, and it seems like for you, at least from the way you spoke, you were pretty driven to try and beat them, right? There was more than just another team to beat, right?
Oh, yes, for sure. I think that personal vendetta and those storylines make esports what it is. Like those are some of the best storylines out there. People still to this day love when Swindle and I are playing against each other, and people, they remember 5 years back when all that drama went down, and they, those storylines still come into play today, even though they're almost irrelevant at this point.
Sure. So, I mean, then there was the period in HoN where it was basically you battling against Zai's team, where you had that Swedish team. It was like Stay Green or something, I think it was, if it's the correct one. And then after that, obviously, at the very, very end, you guys kind of like teamed up, and then you were going into Dota 2 together because everyone was switching over at the time. What was Zai actually like in HoN? Because people have seen what he's been like in Dota 2, and he's obviously been an incredibly versatile player, and he's been fantastic throughout all these different eras. But what was he actually like as a HoN player? Like, what was he like when you were first playing against him and then eventually with him?
Zai was very quiet. Zai was on my team right after we kind of were almost like left/dropped by Complexity. in HoN, we were still kind of playing in these HoN Tour tournaments because we were a top 3 team and we were making, $500 every 2 weeks or whatever it was, or $1,000 sometimes if we did well. So we wanted to continue playing HoN because we were making money and, we still enjoyed the game, but at the same time we saw the future in Dota 2 and that's where we wanted to go. Zai has matured and changed a lot since then, but when we were playing HoN, he was still kind of the same. He was very quiet, very reserved, very good, very talented. He's since then, I think that especially with this brand new team, he's become much more of a vocal leader and people look to him for like guidance, and a lot of his opinions are heard a lot more than they have been in the past.
So an interesting thing I saw you say was that when someone asked you about HoN, you actually said that like the skill sets that you have to be a top HoN player, like you made it sound like it requires like a lot more practice, or it's like there's more skill in it in some way. I can't exactly remember the exact phrasing. Do you know what you meant by that?
I think that the game, I think a lot of people will maybe share this kind of sentiment. I think the game was just faster, like movement speeds and a spell and attack animations. I think everything was just a little bit quicker than Dota. So when I switched from HoN to Dota, I was expecting this kind of, I went back to school for a semester because I thought it was going to take me much longer to kind of get into Dota and become good at it. But, at like 7-8 months, I was like getting ready to join EG on my time of switching. So I had a very, very easy transition, and we were like very genuinely surprised by our success.
I saw that in HoN, you actually went to that season 1 finals, the one where, like, here's the story that people don't know, and I don't know if you've ever addressed this, but because famously on the stream, they managed like the worst production job ever, and it looked like it was some sort of like amateur wrestling tournament in a college basketball gym. But I've actually looked, and if you look online, the actual venue was like sick, wasn't it? Wasn't it like some really good venue?
Yeah, it was the Hardwood Suite at
somewhere in LA, right?
No, it was in Las Vegas.
Vegas, okay.
Yeah, so at the Hardwood Suite, it was like the big basketball room where like a ton of like NBA basketball players stay, and they got like a full court and almost like, well, it's like a half court, but it's a super nice suite. When the lights were on, that place was awesome. We had the after party in the suite as well, and it was super fun. It was super cool.
Okay, because I realize that alone can't be the reason why you left HoN, right? But because of the timing, it looks like if you look at the number of people who did kind of just quit at that point in time, I mean, it seems as though that failure is almost indicative of like the fact that S2 for a while had a pretty good game on their hands. They had a lot of good players, and then somehow it just never took that next level that League of Legends and Dota 2 had. What are your thoughts on like why HoN kind of just had like it went into a dead end basically?
I think most of it's probably on S2. I think they were like an experience, like a very small company, a very new company, and I just don't think they had the kind of like the foresight to do it. I don't know. I don't know. I think that the game was also just kind of a placeholder for a long time. Like they made HoN because Dota 2 was never coming out, and I think like Ice Frog was helping them with the creation of HoN in the first place, and then left and went to go make Dota 2 for Valve. So. I mean, you have a game that's been spawned from Dota 1, and then when Dota 2 comes around, I think you're going to lose a lot of your player base. I know when I first switched to Dota 2, it was really fun to kind of see all the old characters that I knew so well from Dota 1. So. And
I saw actually in HoN, you used to play on a team with MoonMeander. So I wanted to ask, what did you think then? Because obviously he switched over to Dota 2 as well, but it took him a lot longer to get like big success, because he was part of that call lineup that like famously never really did that well offline. Well,
sure.
What do you think of his journey?
Well, I mean, he's definitely doing super well now. I'm glad he found it. Like him winning on OG last year, 2 majors was super impressive, and then this year he's playing for DC, and disappointing TI for him, but I'm sure this year will be different. He's changed. Moon's changed probably more than anyone, to be completely honest. I don't know if you've seen some of those old MoonMeander videos, but he used to be quite the character. When I played with him, he was in kind of his like full entertainer mode, where he was like one of the bigger streamers on Twitch. So he was a total clown, but a lot of fun to be around. I actually lived at the Complexity Gaming House in Houston with him for 2 months, and my computer was sitting right next to him, and I had to just constantly deal with him like taking his clothes off and dancing for his stream and screaming super loud, and it was a lot of fun.
So when you said that you actually, when you moved over to Dota 2, you even sort of like started up college again because you were almost thinking like, it might take me a while to get good at this game. Like, I can't just risk going all in at the beginning. Well, if you look at the context of that era, when you were in Complexity, as you say, you were all in like, you'd moved into a team house. You were obviously one of the best teams. And I saw that you'd said that you thought it was going to be really hard to transition to Dota 2. Is that part of the reason why you stayed in HoN so long? Like, for example, was there any worry that like maybe I just won't ever be good at Dota 2, and like I have to kind of cling to, even if it's a smaller pie in terms of HoN, I have to cling to being what I am at the best at,
Yeah, that definitely was there, and that was one of the scariest things for me as like somebody who had already given up so much to play HoN professionally, to kind of hit that reset button and then try to like do the same exact thing in not a totally different game, but a different game. It's very fortunate that Dota 2 and HoN were, so alike. But I had just gotten to the point in HoN where I was like making, $20,000-$30,000 a year, and I was able to like show my parents that I wasn't wasting my time and that I was getting to travel to all these cool places and experience and meet all these new people. So to give kind of all that up and hit the reset button was very hard to do, and that was part of the reason probably why I stayed in Heroes of New Earth as long as I did.
Right, when you came into Dota 2 and you got the lineup going, that was obviously became Sad Boys and then eventually Evil Geniuses. Was there any kind of lock in how that all came together? Like was it the case that like you and RTZ would have just played together no matter what? And maybe like was it fortuitous at any point in time as to who got in contact with you or when you get the next players, etc.?
I definitely think there was a little bit of luck involved. I don't think there was a great pool for Fear and our tour to choose from, to be completely honest. I think that they didn't really have a lot of better options. I think the other people that were trying out for the team at the time were Fluff and Stuff and Demon. And I think that obviously they made the right decision picking up Zion and myself. And not to say that those other players couldn't have had the same success, but the scene was so stagnant. North American Dota had been dead for we were like coming up right after TI3. So for like 3 years, Dota 2, like North America hadn't done nothing, and they were just recycling the same old players. So it just we met at the right time. I kind of pitched to our tour a couple of unique ideas about how I thought we could utilize his play style in order to be successful, and I guess that made sense to him. And from there, we just played our own game, and people kind of followed us. People say that we kind of changed the meta that year playing with our tour.
Because even though I think it's totally justified when I've seen you make comments like when you first started winning and you'd say like the other NA teams just don't want it as much, or they don't work hard enough, or whatever the reasons you would give. A lot of that's very reasonable. I've known a lot of pros who weren't necessarily willing to like go to any length to win. They'd only win if it's kind of on their own terms. But if we look at even this early part of your career and then the other years afterwards, you always have had some really fantastic players to have as a captain. People like Universe, obviously, Fear, as like sort of stable people, having Zai for multiple periods of time. If you'd have ever, since you got to start out sort of like that quite early on, have you ever wondered what would it be like if PPD was just thrown in the mix of like all the other NA players? If it was just like you and all the call guys and all the people who came decent, all these players are just all in one big mix, and you're just making teams as would happen if their team wasn't succeeding. How would your life have gone? What do you think?
Well, I don't know. I think that I definitely kind of struck gold landing with this group of guys on this team, and I was very lucky to do very well. It's hard to say where I would have fit in otherwise. I was on like a Dignitas roster for a couple weeks before they kicked me, so that was like very devastating for me because I was like just about to join this pro team and just about to kind of finally make my transition to Dota 2 and have a salary and all these like nice things that you dream of as a player, and they just kind of booted me. So I don't know how I would have meshed in with all the other kind of North American players. I think that I kind of put myself on an island when I called everyone out for not trying hard enough or not wanting it enough. But I also think it woke a lot of the scene up and a lot of North Americans up, because we see, especially like this year, there's so many good North American teams. And I'm not going to contribute that all to myself, but we definitely put North American Dota on the map that year.
Sure. So one of the interesting things about that first year with EG was obviously this period of time where you were having success, but it was actually when Fear had to go inactive because of his injury. And at the time, everyone remembers, that you brought in Mason because you used him for international, etc. But what some people will probably forget is when you had EternalEnvy for that one Star Ladder tournament, which was like the first one you used him for. And I remember you actually even said that you actually thought the one position was the easiest to plug someone into in your team, at least. And in general, this is like the player where you could just bring someone good over, essentially, and they could probably at least work in the team. What were the challenges of having to bring in Mason and make that work, and like essentially not having like the full team that on paper you would have had for that year?
Sure. So one of the best things about Fear, even to this day, is that he is an incredibly versatile player. He's played almost like every single position, whether it's carry, mid, or support. So he he can do it all, which is a great thing to have for kind of that one role that we were, or that like safe lane role that we had Mason and Envy kind of filling in for. The thing that was different about playing with Mason and Envy than it was Fear is that they had their heroes. They had their own heroes that they played, and that was pretty much all that they played at that time. Fear, it was nice because we were able to devise our strategy around Artur and him being mid and playing some sort of kind of scaling carry, and then we would just be able to pick whatever hero we needed to win the game for Fear, and he would play that in the safe lane. So when we switched it up, it was still very similar because we just played around Artur, but we just kind of let Envy and Mason play the heroes that they thought they would have success with in the game, and just let them have as much impact on the game as they could have. But we still played around Artur, and we still had the same idea. So that's why our kind of strategies and our success didn't change that much, I think.
Sure. I mean, as you kind of outlined, like, yeah, obviously RTZ played his own heroes and was like this like greedy mid style. In that sense, it's interesting because obviously traditionally whoever plays the one role can be like the carry of the whole game. You think of something like Burning, the traditional carry. In that sense, was Fear always doing that style where he sort of like relieves pressure, as it were, for the mid player, and he's obviously done with Samael as well? Was that actually something that consciously he was doing? Does he just want to play that style of play when he plays that position? Was it like an actual sort of approach you guys came up with for those players?
Yeah, Fear. That's another great thing about Fear is that he wants to win over everything else. He doesn't kind of have like that selfish attitude where he wants to be the hard carry or he wants to play anti-mage every game. Like, he just wants to win. So he'll play whatever he needs to plplay in order to win. He'll go mid if he needs to. He'll go off lane. He'll support a game. So we were able to recognize that we needed to play around, both of Artur in 2014, and then we needed to play around Sumail in 2015. And we were able to, kind of shape our lineups around them, and Fear just kind of slotted in whatever we needed. So he made drafting very, very easy for us.
I mean, we're going to get into obviously a lot of the more drafting related things later in the interview since it's such a key part of your career. But a question I had in this sense, though, is I've noticed even from early on in EG, I mean, admittedly, yeah, Mason was a stand-in, so you have to kind of accommodate the stand-in in some way. You can't just make him do something super intricate that's part of a team. But when you used to switch up sometimes, like who was playing the 1 and 2 out of Mason and RTZ, depending on who had what hero, etc., I've noticed actually in general, this seems to go along with your philosophy that you kind of like, you have the heroes that you want to pick, and then your drafting seems to go more towards just like countering the opponent's plan. It's not as much as you like react to what they're doing or totally change what you're doing in the middle of things. Are you one of these people who has like the philosophy that like you should do what you're best at in terms of even if it's just hero picks? So if that means someone has to switch up the role even to be able to play the hero, is there validity to that? Because I mean, there's a lot of teams that don't do that necessarily.
There's definitely validity to that. I think people are getting better and better at Dota, and I think players are becoming more and more comfortable with more and more heroes, and they're learning more and more play styles. So I think that is maybe fading away a little bit, but it's definitely a nice thing to be able to do because all you need is, there only needs to be one situation where it'd be really nice to have your safe lane player go mid, and if you win that game, that could be an extra $6 million for you. So it's definitely a nice tool to have.
Because one of the teams, obviously, when you were coming up with EG like this, that was very, very good was DK. And this was the team where when you had Envy as a stand-in, you lost them at Star Series. But you came back, you beat them at the Summit, you beat them at TI4. And actually a little detail that I think some people, it went lost on them when you consider the history that you had lost to them in the past was when you did this famous tweet, okay, where you basically said like all according to plan or something, you know, and you revealed what your plan was for the draft when you played DK at TI4, I think it was. And so the interesting thing is, yeah, people understood that meant in that game you had basically a plan, and it sort of, you know, that's what happened. But one thing I think might have gone lost on people is after you'd lost to DK the first time, I saw an interview where you actually outlined this sort of drafting strategy that you don't think, okay, when you play a team like DK, famously they had a lot of heroes they could all play. You don't just like think, right, oh God, what are they going to do? I'm going to have to come up with something on the fly and completely change it up. You said you basically go in with kind of like, you don't try and adapt. You have your plan, you have your heroes you want to pick, and then you're just going to change up like one or two things based on what you think they will pick against yours, as in what they think they'll try and counter you with is what you're going to tweak it with. And it seems like that's what you did essentially. That your philosophy actually bore itself out to some degree, right?
Yeah, that's kind of how those games went down. We almost kind of mapped out our first almost 3, maybe even 4 our hero picks, and we knew kind of exactly the heroes we wanted to have, and we were able to actually get them. And then our 5th pick was a little more flex based on what DK had picked.
When that DK team was super good, it was obviously, it was very exciting, and they were like kind of an all-star team to some degree. What do you think was responsible for them being so good at that point in time? That was like the point in time where it looked that the Chinese teams were like way too scary. And then why do you think they faded as things went on? How did the scene adapt to them, or what happened to them as a team, do you think?
I think anytime you're kind of at the top and you have a target on your back for a long time, especially in a game like Dota where the meta is kind of almost constantly changing just a little bit. So, they can play amazing Dota for tournament after tournament, but eventually people are going to kind of maybe figure it out. And it's hard to continue to change and adapt while you're winning. When you're winning and you're winning tournament to tournament, you're still doing well. It's hard to say like, oh, we should do this now. Like we should change it up totally. So you have a bunch of kind of like hungry fish trying to eat you. So it's tough.
I saw actually in one of your random AMAs, and the thing I like about your AMAs, right, is if it's a joke answer, then it's good that it's quite short, because it can just be funny and it can be a witty one-liner or something, But the problem is, if you ever give like an answer that's like intriguing, there's no more details, so no one can actually find out what you meant by that. So someone once asked you something like, which Chinese player would you like to play with? And you actually named Lan M, who obviously was on this DK team. So I actually want to know, what is the reason why? What stood out to you about this guy? Isn't normally the first person most people would pick, from the Chinese scene.
Yeah, I think he just has a very interesting outlook on the game. He's always come in as kind of a strong leader and having lots of cool and innovative ideas. He plays his own way, which is very unique for Dota, because Dota is so much kind of seeing what your opponents are doing and emulating that and maybe trying to improve that to some degree. But every time I watched Lan M play, he was just blazing his own path, doing whatever he wanted to do, which is just kind of boss mode, kind of cool to see. In hindsight, I don't know if we would have worked too well together, being two kind of strong leadership types, but it would have been fun to at least try and play with him.
So touching on what you mentioned before, where you said about obviously the versatility of Fear, and particularly in how it related to whoever was playing mid. But another thing in your team that you've often cited and given praise for is the fact that when you have Zai and he's playing a support role, he obviously has the versatility to be able to go and play off lane, or to be able to, you can bring in Fear to play support instead if it's the right hero, and you could have Universe go in the jungle. So you've had an incredible amount of versatility in your teams. How much of this actually informed then how you would draft, and how much was the drafting ideas is the reason why people did the different things in that sense?
So we got to do a lot of cool kind of interesting strategies where sometimes we'd throw Zai in the safe lane and have Fear play support. Or I think in one game at Star Ladder we had Zai and myself dual laning mid, and our tour started off in the jungle as Lycan, whereas normally Lycan would go mid, and we kind of threw them a curveball and we ended up winning that game. It didn't go exactly as planned, but it still worked out. So we were able to do a lot of kind of cool and interesting things. And I think myself as a drafter and a leader, I was a lot more creative back then. I'd always try to figure out these kind of cool, almost cheesy strategies that we could take an easy game with. And I haven't really had any kind of cool thoughts like that for a while. And I don't know if maybe the game's matured, or maybe I just have grown less creative in my years. But it's super convenient to have players that can fit into different roles, because you never know when your offlaner is going to kind of give up the offlane and go into jungle, and you need to slot your 4-player in as almost like a pseudo offlaner. And when they have that kind of experience playing an offlaner, then it comes natural to them, which hopefully they don't die as much.
I mean, when we think about Zai when he was in the 2014 lineup, he was obviously a fantastic support player. But then when he went into the secret team afterwards, he was amazing as an offlaner. So I remember you made a comment in an interview. You said it almost as a throwaway joke, but I wondered how much truth there is to it. Where you said that one of the reasons why Fear eventually would just play any core hero is because if he didn't, then he knew Zai was just going to be like, "Oh, I'll play that. Like, just let me play this game." Could Zai have just? Do you think he's naturally suited to want to just play these other roles?
I think Zai is almost like the Dota hipster. Like, he likes playing the cool kind of strange heroes that nobody ever likes to play. So when we do kind of get away from like the current meta, when we did kind of get away from like the standard meta, it was always Zai kind of volunteering to play, oh, let me play Bloodseeker, let me play Sniper, let me play like some crazy hero that's not in the meta right now. Like, he was always the first to volunteer. That was usually his draft contribution back then as well. It was like 5th pick. He's like, just give me this hero. So Zai's a very talented young player.
So 2014 was obviously the year when Chinese Dota was very strong. You know, they had a number of big teams that won tournaments over that year. And as a result, your team was one of the victims of them. You know, you lost to DK early on. You had obviously that final against Invictus Gaming, Newbie and Vici Gaming when you were at TI4. Then you had like the slightly different Vici Gaming lineup that was the one that ESL New York. What was so tough about all these Chinese teams back then? Because obviously the scene has really shifted back over the years, you know.
Yeah, it kind of seems like China is almost kind of behind us. You know, we saw Wings at TI6 look a step above everyone else, but the rest of the teams weren't really there for the most part. And now we see the Chinese team struggling even more. You know, we kind of see Newbie and potentially Wings kind of still up there a little bit, but when you think about like OG and EG and even like DC and VP to some extent, now you just think that those Western teams are just kind of better than the Eastern teams. I'm not sure what exactly changed. I think a big impact was the kind of like the introduction of all the streaming websites where the players take the games or take like their practice regimen way less seriously, which was what the Chinese were known for back in the day. Was like those like, you know, 2 BO5s a day and 10 hours of gaming and strategizing and practicing and watching replays. And I think they kind of moved a lot of their focus to streaming and entertaining their fans because of these like ridiculously overinflated kind of streaming salaries they were getting from these websites.
Actually, a question I had about the Chinese scene as someone who's a Westerner, I want to know what you thought of this. But one of the things I've always found crazy about the Chinese element of Dota 2 is because they have so much talent and because they have this ridiculous thing, like you're saying with the streaming and stuff, where people essentially get on huge contracts. And so as a result, maybe if they want to retire, they can like fake retire for 3 months, you know. You do see this ridiculous reset every single year on all the Chinese teams, you know. I mean, you're lucky if like even a core of 2 or 3 players stay together. You know, sometimes it's like a full reset. And by now it feels like every big player has been on like 4 of the big orgs, you know, like everyone's been on eHome and Invictus, you know, you go through all the names. As a Westerner, is it kind of, obviously they do have like a bigger talent base in terms of famous pros, but isn't this a huge negative, do you think, to be constantly resetting? Is there a benefit to it? Because obviously, I mean, in theory, if you reset and you make the perfect team, it could be better. But what is your take on it as an outsider? Because you've obviously kept with the same kind of core amount of players and just put 1 or 2 pieces in at a time, you know?
Yeah, we've definitely made a lot of changes over the years. But you're right, the Chinese have shuffled a lot, especially after big major events. They're not afraid to just totally hit the reset button and come out with a whole new group of 5 guys. I know that the scene's a lot different there. I think that the team owners are just like sons of like Chinese billionaires, and they just kind of enjoy kind of the idea of like swapping players and building the perfect roster that's gonna, you know, take the scene by storm. So definitely a whole different culture. I don't know if it's necessarily bad. I think that anytime you don't kind of achieve a championship, the easiest thing to do is kind of blame your teammates and, you know, maybe you want to replace them instead of kind of working through it. So maybe that kind of has held them back a little bit. But I mean, we saw Wings come out of nowhere for TI6, and none of their players were really any of these big famous Chinese players. So they maybe there'll be another Wings team come TI7. Who knows?
In early January of 2015, when it was officially announced that RTZ was leaving the lineup, he was going away, he was going to join Secret, was this a shock to you?
This was what? RTZ and Zai leaving, and this was right after we lost online.
The Summit 2.
Yeah, Summit 2, and then we lost online to Virtus Pro in like some tournament. It was not a huge surprise because I remember being at the summit too, and there was a ton of drama. And I definitely lost my cool at one point during the summit too, which was not the right thing for me to do. Yeah, that was definitely wrong of me. But I was frustrated. I'll use that as an excuse. I was fed up. I was angry. But that was like months and months of problems, kind of dealing with that and the build up. So I wasn't too surprised to hear them leave, but it is frustrating to almost find it like sometimes people are being hypocrites, I think, or at least like that's how my biased perspective is, that people say like, you know, this team isn't working out because of this and that. And so it's like, what are you going to do to fix it? And are you going to give that a proper chance? Are you actually going to, you know, work hard and practice to fix those things, or are you going to give up and, you know, move on to supposedly greener pastures? So it's kind of how I felt about the whole situation. I wasn't totally surprised, but I was more so disappointed.
Because I mean, even though the timing, okay, is like your last offline event obviously had been the summit, and not only had you lost to that new secret team, but you'd even lost to C9, who you obviously used to always get the better of when it was the big game. So that surely can't have been enough to really make this move happen, make this breakup happen. Like, it had to be more than just like those couple of results, right?
I mean, there's definitely a lot of personal beef. I think myself and our tour have always had some clashing heads, just because we have two, you know, very strong personalities. Our tour believes, you know, in his way to play Dota, and I believed in my way to play Dota, and we didn't really compromise too much. We didn't really sit down.
How are those two ways different, though?
I just remember, like, at this certain point of the meta, I think our tour wanted to play kind of Dager or Terrorblade almost every game, which were these kind of illusion split push based heroes, and I thought and believed that we could, you know, with teamwork, that we could play a different style and that would work better for us. And when you have like a polarizing player like Artur or Sumail or Miracle or, you know, whoever, you kind of have to play around them. So in hindsight, that was kind of a mistake by me to not kind of believe in Artur's idea and make that idea work for us. But I just was kind of arrogant and selfish and thinking that, you know, we could win in a different way.
I mean, when this breakup happened, like on the outside, it looked ridiculous because obviously you'd had so much success that year. I mean, I think you were like top 4 like every event, you know, you'd won a whole bunch of them. Sure, you didn't win TI, but you had the standing at the time. So everyone else was like, okay, great. Once they get Fear back in the lineup, let's see what they're really going to do. And then suddenly the lineup was broken up already. What were your real thoughts after that had happened? Like when they were going out in that way? I mean, I remember, wasn't this actually the period of time where I think I read something like before you got Aoi, you actually offered a spot to No Tail, right?
I reached out to a lot of players at that time. I think No Tail was one of them to come and play the 4 position for us. I always been a huge fan of No Tail, you know, coming from Heroes of New Earth, and definitely had a lot of respect for him. I knew that he didn't really have the best. He didn't have all the success that he's having now, so he was a little bit different of a free agent at the time. But yeah, I mean, he turned me down, which is fine. I think everyone kind of saw Artur and Zai leaving, and they were like, "Oh, EG's fucked. Like they're done for. Like who are they gonna get to replace these guys?" And you know, we were super fortunate and lucky that C9 was just randomly kicking Aoi, who we thought was one of their better players, and you know, we just took a chance and found Sumail out of an in-house league. So you know, the gamble worked, but it was we weren't in like the most advantageous position at the time. We didn't know things were going to work out the way they did.
Because that's kind of the context I wanted to get into, because the problem is whenever everyone looks backwards in history, they'll just look and go, oh yeah, Sumail, he turned out to be brilliant, so that was fine, I'm sure. Oh yeah, Aoi was actually like, it turned out in terms of a hero pool, yeah, it was great for the team. So it'll look now like, oh, just continued success, you know, this is all fine. But if you look at the timing, yeah, like you're saying, No Tail hadn't had the offline success at that point in time. And so the idea, he didn't just turn you down, he was sort of like, no, I don't really buy that this lineup's going to be any good. Like, no thanks. Like that kind of shows that like people did really think, oh, if RTZ's gone and Zai's gone, I mean, this team's kind of it's on the slide downwards.
Totally reasonable. I think before myself, Artur, and Zai showed up at EG, you know, it's hard to say like Fear Universe even had, you know, that much success. So it was kind of like we did lose two of our like 3 new guys who had brought so much success over to EG and kind of changed everything for us.
I don't want to like force a storyline if it wasn't there, but did the fact that, you know, that storyline I brought up when you were in HoN, when those guys like kicked you from the team, and then you were battling to try and beat them. Was there any sense of that as well? Like, oh, like I want to prove that this is not the end, and I'm like, also I want to beat Secret if I can, you know.
I mean, there's definitely like animosity. You know, I definitely was not super happy. I kind of had like that super kind of like famous kind of almost like asshole-ish tweet after we won DAC where I was like, one less ego, one more championship kind of a thing.
That's pretty good though. If it was like an anime or a movie, that's pretty sick.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I mean, it was not very nice, for sure, but that's part of the fun, right? Like, that's a little bit of trash talk here there, never hurt anyone. So that was but it wasn't the same. You know, the hatred that like Swindle and I had for each other back then was just unbelievable, and I think it was overblown because we were kind of like angsty 19 and 18-year-olds. So things changed a little bit with time. But I was still like really good friends with Zai, and I was like, I didn't really have anything against Zai because I don't know why. I never really clashed heads with Zai. Me and him have always gotten along because he's just an easy person to get along with. But definitely with our tour, there was like, I want to beat him and I want to make him like regret leaving, that kind of a thing, even though it really didn't matter.
Sure. So when you say that, like here's the thing, because over the years of being a captain, people do learn those other elements as well, you know, like, oh, how to be like who to be a bit easier on, and how to maybe like sweeten the message a little bit, you know, so that it goes across better. And now you're a CEO, you know, so you're learning the language of business and stuff. When you say that now, like, yeah, it wasn't very nice to do that tweet and stuff, that is clearly a part of your personality though, right? I bet like you do seem to like love it when you kind of like get one over on someone, or it's like you were proven right and then they were proven wrong or something. There's something about that in your personality, right?
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. I'm not afraid to take shots and be an asshole and be a little rude from time to time. I'm not trying to bring anyone down, but if they kind of cross me, I'm not afraid to like throw some mud back at them if I feel like it's necessary. I've also like taken the high road a lot of times where I just like don't say anything. But in that like particular setting, I just felt like I was on top of the world winning that like $2 million tournament or whatever it was, and I was angry and frustrated that whatever happened had happened, and I just felt like throwing some shade.
When that scenario happened, when RTZ left the first time, where actually was his level at as a player at the time, in like the context of the other top players? You know, like, was he the best Western player at the time? Like, how was his level, do you think?
I definitely think he was one of the definitely like a top like North American player. It's hard to say because Dota is so reliant on how your team does and how you play around, you know, talented players like our tour. So, I know he was definitely like a top player, and it was like very frustrating for us to lose him because we were, you know, scrambling with like, how are we going to replace a player like our tour and kind of even have anything to similar success that like we all have grown to want so much.
So since you brought in Aoi to Evil Geniuses, I want to talk a little bit about the Cloud9 lineup that he was in before that, because I agree with you. That's one of the really weird things to me. When I heard that he didn't leave, he was actually kicked, I was like, I don't know what EternalEnvy's doing now, because when I looked at their team had a lot of positives. You know, it had some like skilled players, and it had some players who had very interesting playing styles. But then it also had a lot of players who seemed to like, maybe they got overconfident at times, or they choked at times, or whatever. And of all the players, he seemed like one of the few ones that I could look at and go, this guy seems like a fairly calm person, you know, he seems like he doesn't have a lot of those problems. So that Cloud9 team, like your rivalry with them, on paper isn't much of a rivalry, you know, you beat them pretty much every time. It felt like, did you view them as a rival?
It was a fun rival, right? It's the rival
for you, I'm sure.
Yeah, it was great. We're playing Cloud9 again. Oh, it's elimination. Perfect. Like, no, it was definitely like kind of like our North American rival. Like they were like the second best North American team, so we were constantly playing them in qualifiers, and when we got matched up with them against tournaments, I mean, they were a group of, we were friends with that team. Like that was some of the guys that we hung out with when we went to tournaments and stuff. So definitely like a little bit of a friendly rivalry, but they knew we were like, we were kind of like their like the final boss. Like if they wanted to do well in a tournament, they had to get through us, and that wasn't something that happened very frequently.
I mean, one of the things people always threw around about that team, obviously, because how famous it was that they would lose the close elimination game, and if they did well in the upper bracket, you know, that team's going to beat them in the lower bracket. You know, these sorts of storylines, as people used to say, they just choked, or they threw the games, or, you know, like, the problem with these is they're like very vague terms, you know, that anyone can apply to a loss. What was there a degree to which, like if EG obviously had a famous quality where you were fairly clutch and you would win from the lower bracket, etc., do you think there was some choke in Cloud9?
Yeah, I definitely think there was a little bit of choke in Cloud9. They had a trouble just kind of closing out games. Whenever we were kind of in trouble up against Cloud9, it would be because we like kind of lost the early game, and we were kind of like struggling and just like trying to we were just existing in the game and just hoping that eventually Cloud9 would slip up, and more times than not they would, and we were very quick and good about capitalizing on those mistakes.
Why has EternalEnvy never properly been in a team with you? Is there any particular reason? Was there any moment it ever really happened?
It almost happened a couple times. We offered him the spot over Mason after Star Ladder, I think, and he turned that one down. And then right after TI5, we offered him, or right after TI4, we offered him to try out for the position that eventually Fear had filled. He turned us down there as well. And I think when we lost Artur and Zai after DAC, or right before DAC, after Dota Pit, we talked to Cloud9 about maybe doing like some sort of merger, and he also turned that down as well. And then TI6 or after TI5, we just won. Everybody came to me and was like, "Peter, play with me. Like, I'll do anything. Okay. Like, just play with me." And that was not like a move out of desperation or anything. That was just like the smart thing to do at that time. I think like I was a proven winner, and everybody just like wanted to get on board.
So was this related to that famous thing where, for whatever reason, EternalEnvy used to say like he didn't want to play with anyone who had one because then like he in some way thought it like invalidated him winning, even though the logic doesn't really quite check out, and eventually he obviously did just go and do that anyway.
Yeah, it's not the best logic, and I do remember him saying that, and I think that he maybe has a little bit of regret for something like that, but he's also like the kind of guy who doesn't dwell on the past and is, he's doing his own thing now, and he's excited and moving forward and doing the very best he can do. Okay.
Because I had a question, as an outsider, someone who, maybe was friendly with him but never actually played with him and on a team with him. For all the success he's now had, like he has won a major now, and he has had a bunch of LAN wins when he went over to Secret, and in general, as a player even, because of it winning, he's more highly esteemed, Why do you think he's never done well at a TI? Is it just bad luck? What is your take on it? Is there something behind it?
I don't think he's the right polarizing player, or at least he hasn't been for a lot of the metas that have lined up at the International. I think that the way he plays Dota worked really well at the Shanghai Major, and no one really had an answer for it. But I don't know if he's had the convenience of having the way he plays Dota be the best way to play Dota at an International. Okay. So, and he's always played Dota the same way, which is kind of like that ratty kind of like makes a really greedy plays and does some strange things, but a lot of times it works for him. Secret was able to use that and make that work at the Shanghai Major, but no one has been able to do that since for him, especially at an International.
And do you think, just for his strengths, does he have to play that style, or is he set in that way? Because here's the thing, I would figure on some level you could relate to him, because he does seem like a very driven person himself, But it is strange that he has always just retained the same playing style in some sense.
Yeah, he's definitely tried to change, and he has been changing a bit. He plays mid now for his team. He's been doing a lot of different things for NP. That being said, I don't know if he is that kind of polarizing. That's the thing I think NP lacks. I don't think they have that polarizing player that you develop Dota strategy around.
By polarizing, you mean like star player, yeah?
Yes, star player. Your Sumail, your even your RTZ, Miracle. For my new kind of a team, we picked up QO, who I think MVP was using as a very polarizing player. He determined how everyone else on that team played, and I don't think NP necessarily has it. I think they're more of like a unit of a team, and they're all trying to like formulate a strategy and play together. And I don't know if that's how Dota works. I don't know if you can. I think Dota's a little more chaotic than that. You can't expect the game to be so structured. So having just a clear idea of playing around one person and having a route to victory is a much more effective way to win tournaments.
Okay, the other thing about the famous DAC tweet is that if you think of the context, which is that, yeah, no one really believed in that lineup. It was hard to get replacement players, you know, and then out of nowhere, you've literally just won the massive tournament. You know, it's a really big tournament. But if you look at the tournaments after that, before TI5, it looked like, oh, that was kind of like a one-off. That was a bit of a fluke. So in a sense, actually, that's also why I think it's even more validated, because, like, was there any extent to which when you won that tournament, you were like, okay, we pulled this off, but are we really going to be the number one team? Like, was it like what were the thoughts after that tournament? Because it seems like that lineup wasn't necessarily as unbeatable as people might have thought, right?
Yeah, I think at that tournament we played the lower bracket final against Secret, and we 2-0'd them. And it was, I think at that point everyone had thought we already won the tournament. Like that was like beating Secret was winning that tournament. And like even though we had to play Vici the next day, like we still felt like we were like, you know, we achieved something great, and that we like validated ourselves as a team, and we had like a whole new kind of sense of confidence going into the rest of the year. The rest of the year didn't really work out incredibly well, but we still put up like a ton of second places. But you know, we didn't feel like we were the best team. But what we did learn was, especially even at DAC, like maybe we weren't the best team, but the best team doesn't always win the tournament. And the cool thing about Dota is that you only really have to do well at one tournament a year to call it a successful year. And you know, we were lucky enough to have the two tournaments that we did well at that year be, you know, DAC and TI5, which at the time were the biggest and like the third biggest tournaments ever in esports. So very convenient.
So obviously the other storyline of DAC that is ridiculous is the storyline of just picking up Sumail almost like out of nowhere, you know, and then him just not just being good, but being like one of the best players of the year. Like, could you really have known when he picked him up? What was there an element of gamble in it when you did it yourself?
Yes, there was definitely. We didn't know that he would be the player that he became, but we were hopeful that he would be, and that's why we took a chance with him rather than going for someone that we had already known, someone that had already been in the scene for a long time, maybe one of these kind of like North American Dota players that was being recycled from team to team. You know, we could have done that. That would have been the safe route, but we took a gamble and said like, hey, you know, we're not trying to get, you know, 4th or top 8 or top 6. Like we want to win. So let's take a gamble with somebody new and see if it won't work out.
Because, I mean, it wasn't just that you didn't win the next tournaments. It's that obviously on a number of key occasions you lost to Secret, and that was like their really strong period, you know, where they won the 4 tournaments. I remember seeing, I think it was Awi I saw an interview with, where he'd said something along the lines of like, that a lot of people in the scene saw Secret as like, okay, yeah, maybe they're the best team at that point in time. But people thought of them as like, it's because they're an all-star team. You know, they have really skilled players and somehow they win the tournaments. But in scrims, I remember him saying, I think like Evil Geniuses would beat them in scrims, or other teams were beating them in scrims. Was it like, what was your take on how they were able to be dominant in that like summer period?
Yeah, that was tough for us, playing up against them and getting second. I think it was like 3 tournaments in a row or something. We just like lost to Secret in the finals. It was like really challenging for us because, you know, and I think in like the second and then especially like the third final we played against them, we just knew that they were probably going to win. And that's definitely not the attitude you want to have when you go into a Dota match. We just kind of realized that they were better than us. And even though like we had all these ideas and different kind of strategies and things that we saw kind of glimmers of success with, at the end of the day, like we were still losing. We knew we were close, but we were still losing. So it was like very frustrating for us to constantly have to battle up against them.
So my background obviously at the moment is mainly CSGO, and in CSGO what I love is, it's been the same in Counter-Strike forever actually, is that I've noticed whenever there's a major, I mean obviously we don't have a TI, we just have majors, you know, but they're treated the same as an international game, because basically they're like the ultimate thing you have to win. And I've noticed, first of all, there's very few people ever do win the major that aren't like, you know, really all-time great players, you know. And so part of the reason I put that down to is like, you know, the level of pressure on everyone, the fact that because everyone's goal is that tournament, you know, everyone's going to practice the maximum for it, everyone's going to get their rest in, you know, it's like essentially everyone's auditioning to have their best day of the year on that particular moment. And so I've noticed for internationals, there is a pretty big trend that there'll always be a team who at some point in time was like the best in the world earlier in the year, was winning huge tournaments earlier in the year. I mean, every year you can name this team, you know. And then at the international, they not only did they not do well, usually they don't even make top 3, you know, they don't even contend for the title. So your teams, in this particular instance, most famously, had almost one of their best runs ever at the international, you know, when it all really mattered, not in the other tournaments. So how was this team that otherwise was losing, coming second place, etc., what changed at the international for you?
I think we got really lucky to have a lot. We also knew how, like we were talking about earlier, we knew how we wanted to play, and we weren't really trying to change that at all. You know, we had, 4 to 5 kind of power heroes for each of our players, and we knew like, hey, we want you to focus playing on these guys. So we were just like totally comfortable with the way we were drafting and the way we were playing, and it was working. One of our practice partners was actually CDEC, who we ended up playing in the finals. We played against them a bunch of times before the international, and then in between the group stage and the playoffs, we played them as well. And we just, we just like found ourselves as a team, and we found kind of exactly how we wanted to play. And Dota is kind of a game where the muscle memory is kind of almost there. I know it's complicated because I think like as long as you have like the right heroes and the right strategy, it's like almost like 70% of the game, and like is you knowing how to play a certain way and not so much like your actual play in the game. I think it's very kind of just like people know what they're doing before they get into a game, and it's about executing that, which I think is the easier part. I think the knowing how to do it and what to do is the harder part. So we had kind of figured out the hard part, I think, for that tournament for ourselves as a team.
So when I talked about in the lineup before, the 2014 lineup, like obviously the amount of versatility, if you have Fear and Zai and Universe all in one team, is going to be ridiculous. But having Aoi, at least in this meta, seemed to be like an advantage, right? I mean, the heroes he could play for this exact tournament they certainly helped, didn't they? Yes,
for sure. And having versatility is great, but it's not always the best thing. Sometimes it's better to have, no versatility and have exactly how you want to play be in front of you all the time. And that was kind of what we had with Mason at TI4, is Mason had a couple heroes that he knew how to play, and we tried to make sure that he always had one of them. And the same thing with Aoi at TI5. We recognized that maybe his hero pool was the smallest, and we made sure that we were like first picking his hero. Or, if it was in like the third or fourth pick, we made sure that it was a hero he was incredibly comfortable on, and that he was confident that he would have a good game on. And when you enable your players like that, oftentimes they have really good games. And Aoi, as like this 4 position that was playing very differently than everyone else at the tournament, was kind of like securing our victories over and over again, just by playing his kind of unique play style.
When you look back in that sense, like you're kind of describing here the impact of the meta on a team's success, I feel like that's one thing that, just because it almost goes without saying that is going to be the case in whether it's League of Legends, HoN, or Dota, whatever, any game that's constantly evolving and has so many variables in all the heroes and the champions, yeah, it's going to be the case that the meta is massively going to dictate who wins and who loses. But because on some level, people's individual story is like, how well did I do and how did I succeed? So if they win, they want it to be like, no, it was all my hard work that won me the game. They never want to say like, yeah, also, by the way, the game was like sort of perfectly in my wheelhouse at that moment, and then I had a teammate who happened to have this hero he could play, because that doesn't sound as cool, right? But
no, for sure.
I have to figure, as a captain and as a drafter, this must be very challenging, though, the idea that if the game changes 2 months from now, you might have had the ultimate team at one point in time, and then 2 months from now, it's a very dysfunctional team, and eventually, you might have to kick someone if it doesn't work, just because the game has changed in a way that maybe you can't adapt to it, you can't move to it. Has that been tough for you in Dota 2?
Well, I think we've always had the benefit of having very versatile players, being able to kind of shift through. It's all about trying to make that meta work for your players. And I think that there's almost always a way to do it. It's just finding out that way, which is the hard part. I think most notably in like 2015, when we brought back our tour, we had both Sumail and Artur, who on paper were both very polarizing players, and we had a really hard time kind of adapting a play style around one of them, because we felt like we were trying to play around both of them at all the times, and it just wasn't really working out. So maybe with a little more practice we could have gotten there, we could have figured it out, but not totally certain.
In the final against CDEC, obviously you had lost to them in the upper bracket final, and they played an incredible game then. What do you think was different in the final? Like, did you have a set plan of like what you had to do differently? Was it just the same game over again, but you won? What was it like?
So, like I said before, they were kind of our practice partners, and we had always kind of honestly done like better against them. So we were very confident going into that series that we were just kind of the better team. I always tell people after we lost to them 2-0 in the winter bracket, we kind of came back and kind of had almost the same discussion that we had when we lost to Vici at DAC in the winter bracket 2-0. Okay. We said like, hey, like, why are we being so negative? We're top 3 at TI. Like, we didn't even expect to be here. Like, let's just go in tomorrow, be positive, be optimistic, do our very best. And those things sound cheesy, but they do change the way games like this are played. Your confidence is super key in Dota. And when you're confident that the play you're about to make is going to work, a lot of times it will work more so than it won't. And those are huge factors. And, you know, with that change going into the final day, we were just a totally different team. So going into the final, we were very confident against CDEC. We felt like we were the better team. We had some ideas about how maybe we wanted to play against them, and we just kind of ran with it. And we were lucky enough for them to be successful.
Why are you someone who has been so open about like why you drafted something or how you thought about it? I mean, obviously you've done a bunch of videos on famous games that you had, etc. I mean, I realize, you know, it's good for building brand popularity and showing off like how you were thinking, etc. But I know a lot of in-game leaders in different games who are very superstitious about that stuff. You know, they don't want anyone to have any little insight or any info. They feel like if it could be a weakness. Is this something that doesn't concern you?
No, it's definitely something that's concerned me, and it was part of the reason why I didn't constantly always do draft analysis. I kind of tried to only do them after major events, because first off, that's when they would get the most attention, and usually after major events, the patch would come in and change pretty much how Dota was played almost entirely. So there was like a little bit more security and kind of putting my thoughts out there. I think that also for like, I definitely do it for stuff like for my ego. You know, I like seeing people watching my stuff and people enjoying my content and people like saying, oh, you're so smart, like, yeah, that was a genius move, blah, blah, blah. Like, those things make me feel good, as they should, like any person. Pretty natural, I think. Also, being kind of like this support player, it's kind of hard to build your brand, honestly, I think, as a support player. So like doing these kind of extra things behind the scenes has helped me get my name out there and get my face out there for people to become fans, just because I think that like mid players and carry players naturally just get all the attention because everybody wants to be the next RTZ kind of a thing. Sure.
When I described before, like obviously a very, very simplistic summary where I kind of said that your philosophy seems to have been like, I mean, I actually had like a quote I put down here that was just from an AMA, I think, but it kind of it played into what it seemed like you said. You said, stick to own plan while countering the enemy. Like, obviously it can't be that simplistic for every game, you know, not like you just do that every time, but does that define kind of your philosophy in Dota in terms of drafting?
For sure. It's changed a lot since then, but definitely in like 2014, 2015, that was definitely my philosophy about how to draft and how to play up against opponents. You know, use like your couple last picks for flex and just try to play your own game.
How wide open do you actually think the meta is? Because I've noticed from following a lot of games where there is a meta game, you know, literally dictated to by patch changes, etc., and not just how people play, that a lot of people, as soon as they define even a very basic early meta on like a new patch, they almost become like prisoners of it. You know, they think, right, the meta means there's only one way to play. You've got to do this, this, and this. And if this guy who's winning's doing it, I've definitely got to do that. Like, it seems like in general, as like this is why I brought that topic up. It seems like in general, you've always thought that like there was more room in the meta to do other things than maybe this sort of approach.
For sure. We even saw like people thought the meta was really stale after TI4. You know, they were like super disappointed in how the games went. The grand final for TI4 was like over in like an hour and a half.
It's depressing.
Like, it was like one of the worst kind of finals ever to watch. But even right after that, there was no patch. Immediately we went into a different tournament and we played a totally different meta, and we just like we demolished that tournament. We did incredibly well. So Dota is kind of cool because the meta can almost always change, and people are always trying to figure out a new way to play. And even if it isn't the best way to play, it's very subjective because it's all about what somebody thinks is good and not always what actually is good. Because if somebody thinks Shadow Fiend's really good, they play it, they have success with it. Somebody sees them playing it, they go, oh, we should play Shadow Fiend. They play Shadow Fiend, they have success with it. All of a sudden, Shadow Fiend's a top pick when he's maybe not that strong of a hero. So it's a little silly from at times, but there's always room for variation, I think, which is part of the reason why we all love Dota so much.
So being as the International is obviously the ultimate tournament to win as a Dota 2 player, and you did it from the lower bracket, this seems like an appropriate time to bring up the fact that PPD's teams win almost every tournament from the lower bracket. I mean, I actually looked at the stat up, and I think it was like in 6 out of 8 of your LAN victories, you won from the lower bracket. Just before I ask any questions, what is your take on that? Why do you think that happens?
I think that one of the reasons is we're a North American team, so our practice opponents are very weak for the most part. So when we go to tournaments, it takes us, we do well because we're good players, but eventually it just takes one team just to kind of beat us up pretty badly for us to learn exactly how everyone's playing at this tournament. That's one of the reasons. I also think that we're very good at learning from our defeats, and I've always been very good at almost figuring out exactly why we lost and putting into plans a new strategy that will definitely change that. A lot of teams, I think Wings at TI6 was one of those teams that didn't do that, whereas like I would lose to them once and then the next time I would play them, they would play the same way, and I could kind of change my kind of strategy up, which would give me a better chance of winning. Wings was like very good about just also changing it up even though they had won previously and just doing something totally new, which is part of the reasons why I think they were so dominant at that tournament.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting because first of all, like considering we're talking about pro players, the best players in the world, fans would be amazed how many really, really good players can lose a game where they clearly, made mistakes and maybe had the wrong approach, but they will just tell you like, no, like, we were just unlucky. Like, if I played it over, I'd win that game again. I mean, it's actually not easy for some really good players to kind of put their ego aside, right, and go like, no, I took the wrong approach. I got to change everything up.
That's the great thing about Dota is like, even though if you're just playing like matchmaking and like, shit to your public games, you can always play better. Nobody ever plays a perfect Dota game, and being able to learn from your previous games is absolutely necessary if you want to be successful.
When you say, okay, in the past, like, you had a very set way of how you wanted to play the game, and, at times maybe it wasn't always correct in terms of how the meta was going. At the same time, I have also seen you say many, many times in all like different opportunities, like essentially that all you care about is winning. Like you don't care about what hero you have to play to win, or what player you have to play with to win. And the problem is, if people hear that, they might think that's just arrogance. Like, oh, I just want to be the best in that way, But it does seem like over your career you've done a pretty good job of adapting and coming back and figuring new things out again. Do you think this still holds that like the number one thing was always winning for PPD?
I think that the number one thing was winning for me. I think that I'm very strongly motivated by money now.
Okay.
But like, it's
not as great a story for the kids. Okay.
Not as great a story for the kids, but it's there's so much money in Dota. It's unbelievable what winning a Dota tournament can do for your life. Winning TI5 changed my life forever. Like totally different. Like I moved from Indiana to California, and now it's changed so many things. It's unbelievable what winning these major tournaments can do for you and your life. So definitely motivated by money, but I'm also like, I've always been very interested in the business side of things, which is part of the reasons why I'm doing what I'm doing now. I just think that it's just a different game. That's all. But winning is like proving my ego, and winning is definitely a part of it as well. But I'd be lying if I said the money wasn't a huge factor.
Okay. I've also noticed, like, not only in like, individual tournaments did you lose in the upper bracket and then come back and win the tournament, but in your career, if you ever have like a big loss to a specific opponent, it feels like later on you do kind of like avenge that loss in most cases. Are you someone where like do key losses like drive you? Do you like tunnel in on that person and focus on it? Is it just a coincidence and you're practicing for everyone the same?
I don't think so too much. I don't hold like kind of like a grudge or a vendetta against a certain team because they beat me in a Dota game. I think it's more so just like looking at ourselves and seeing what we did wrong, and hopefully not repeating those kinds of mistakes.
So another interesting stat for you, okay, is that every title that PPD's teams have won have been in double elimination tournaments. you've actually never won a single elimination tournament. The reason I want to ask you this is, like, in CSGO, we only have single elimination, mate. So what do you think of this?
I would suck if all of our events were single elimination. I had never won a tournament before. But I don't know. I think going to the Boston Major this year as a spectator and watching single elimination, there's definitely like a ton of flaws, because we saw like Adfina make it to the finals when I don't think they would have done very well against a team like Virtus Pro or EG,
I mean, matchup
for example.
is obviously hugely dependent, right?
Yeah, and it's like it was very unfortunate to see teams like Virtus Pro go out in like a top 8 position when they were arguably like a top 2 team, or a top 3 team. So it's like that's the frustrating part of single elimination. But I was definitely entertained. You know, it was definitely an entertaining tournament, except for the final, because I felt like the final was the semifinal between OG and EG. Okay. So, I mean, it definitely changes things. I think it's fine personally. I mean, it would suck for me, like with my past, but I wouldn't be opposed to playing in single elimination tournaments in the future. It's just obviously I have a better track record at the double elimination ones. So maybe if I'm trying to win, we should stick to those.
Okay, so you reach the mountaintop of Dota. You win the international. Everything's going great. You know what? You're totally vindicated. This new lineup you've got. You did it without RTZ. That's a pretty sick storyline as well. So anyone who said, like, you know, you're done at that point. So here's what you got to explain to me, because you still haven't ever publicly explained this well. Is like, what's the reason then for kicking Aoi? Because I realized then you had a chance to get RTZ. Listen, as a GM, it all sounds great. You know, these sounds like if you want to make like trades for the future to have certain players, that's all great. But with the storylines, why break up the lineup? Why not play more tournaments?
Maybe not the best decision in hindsight, obviously. But I don't think any of us really, like, we loved winning, right? But like I said before, we didn't feel like we were the best team at TI5. And the goal is always to be the best team. And even though we had won the international, we still felt like we got very, very lucky, you know, having to play up against mostly Chinese teams that I've always done very, very well against. Not having to play up against Secret, who kind of bombed out at that tournament at 8th. And you know, we were still friends with Artur. A lot of the guys are very close with him still. Me and him have always kind of had like a rocky relationship where we clash a little bit in game, but outside of game, you know, we're buds. So kicking Aoi was, I don't know. Like I didn't. None of us really. That lineup was almost like we were forced to get into that lineup. Like we were forced to play with Aoi and Sumail because we had no other options. And it was the same thing with Mason too. When we kicked Mason, even though we did so well at TI, Mason was a stand-in because we didn't really have any other options. Not that Aoi and Mason weren't great players, but they weren't our first choices. And coming out of TI5, like I said before, every single player wanted to play with us. So we kind of had our pick of everyone. And everyone wanted to play with Artur.
Because the thing is, like, here's the thing: if you focus only on the RTZ side of things, it does make sense. Like I say, like if you want to build a future team, that's a great person to have on your team. You know, you had success with it in the past. It's just on the Aoi side of things, like the reasons you gave at the time, they sounded a bit shaky, man. Where you just saw like, oh, he sort of talks too much or something. Like, you know, it just never really. It was hard to understand what you meant by that. Like, was there any specific problems with Aoi? Because obviously you had him in the team eventually when you were forced to do a corner again in the future, right?
Yeah, I was. We definitely saw a few kind of slip-ups from Aoi at TI5, even though we did win. And it was definitely like very big mistakes that we were all very aware of, but we just kind of, you know, kept on with a positive, optimistic kind of attitude and just moved on. And, you know, still brought out the victory. So I'm not trying to like bring all of that back up now. And I definitely regret kind of writing and saying the things that I had said about him, because some of them, you know, they all came from like a little bit of truth, but I definitely exaggerated probably maybe on a couple of them to kind of get my point across. And I think I was frustrated as a leader, and I probably should have just kept my mouth shut. But I was like frustrated at the community kind of shitting all over me instead of like, you know, kind of respecting our wishes as a team for not wanting to play with someone.
Obviously, since he's replacing Zai, who's like a very unique player and had played with you in the past, etc. Do you think it was difficult for Aoi and Evil Geniuses? Because I remember he made some comment along the lines of like, when he first joined the team, he said he was like kind of lost, like it was difficult to know what the farm patterns were in the team and stuff. Like, do you think it was like was it a difficult transition for him to join Evil Geniuses in the first place?
I don't know too much about that. I think that it was very convenient because he had played a lot of the heroes that Zai was already playing for us at the 4 position. So it was like a very easy transition for him. I think we kind of, like at TI5, we kind of adapted and played around the way he wanted to play. So I don't think it was too uncomfortable for him to kind of fit into the team, because we kind of fit around him in a lot of ways.
When RTZ rejoined the team, was there any like vindication in him rejoining the team?
I think that it was just like, I don't know about vindication, but like he was definitely like, he had a lot of regret about like leaving, obviously. And we just kind of all wanted to win. So we were just focused on what was next for us and how we could win.
Like, obviously, since Secret famously actually did quite poorly at that tournament, was there any kind of notion that, you know, by going out and sort of trying the Secret experiment, you know, he'd seen that the grass isn't always greener, and he'd come back and he's like, listen, let's work it out. Like, maybe we can make our styles of play work. Was there any of that? Or is that just the movie in my head?
No, I mean, I definitely thought that. I mean, that was kind of in the back of everyone's head, was that like he came back and now he finally realizes that, like, you know, maybe the grass wasn't greener on the other side, and maybe him leaving was a mistake, and we could have, you know, hopefully worked things out. And, you know, next time when we come across those problems, we'll be a little bit better about dealing with them rather than kind of giving up, which is what happened previously.
Okay. Because when you got RTZ back in the lineup and you made this team, it was quite an interesting run of form, because on the one hand, the results all look great. Like, aside from that one where it was a single aim, ironically, at the ESL New York, where he lost to Vega, but they did win the whole tournament, you know, so that doesn't feel like a legit 5th to 8th, you know. Aside from that, again, you know, it's like normal EG, you know, top 4 all the time, you win an event, you have a bunch of decent placings at the majors. But I noticed one thing that was very different from the old EG is if you look at the amount of different teams you lost to a lot of teams. It was like you ran the gamut of people you lost to. You know, I think you lost to something like 7 different teams over that period of time, with like the second era of RTZ being in the lineup. How would you define that era? It's still clearly a very good team, but what were the issues, do you think?
I don't think we worked hard enough. I think that we kind of all had that like post TI5 kind of like sense of relaxed kind of attitude. We didn't practice enough as we should have, and we didn't take the game as seriously enough as we probably should have. It was something that we had actually talked about post Shanghai Major right before we kind of went our separate ways, and it was something that, you know, we all wanted to work on things and get better at. And it's unfortunate because like we spent that 1 week right after Shanghai Major doing none of the things that we had talked about at the Shanghai Major to improve on. And then right after Dota, we go to another tournament, Dota Pit, with no practice at all on all the things that we had talked about. And we get second place there as well. And all of a sudden, you know, we have to make changes in roster, even though we hadn't really practiced on any of the things that we wanted to practice on. So people just, once again, just kind of gave up rather than working on the things that we knew were necessary in order for us to be the best.
So I've noticed a trend, which is like, if I go back in time to like, let's go way back to 2014. I remember actually when you were at the period when you took in EternalEnvy as a stand-in for that Star Ladder, you actually said that you had not practiced with him at all before that event. And in fact, at that time, Evil Geniuses didn't practice much at all anyway. You just played your like official online games and then played the LANs. And then coming into later eras, I mean, you said here, like part of the reason that you thought you came back from the lower bracket so many times is that, you know, like, your practice in NA, etc., maybe isn't as good, and then you go to the LAN, you have to kind of warm up. How much actual practice in terms of as a team and playing scrims has been the case throughout your career? It sounds like not that much, right?
We always do like boot camps. That's when we take practice most seriously. Usually like a week or week and a half before major tournaments, we'll really kind of bunker down. A lot of times, because we're a team mostly based out of US West in 2015, we would go to Boston and boot camp at a LAN cafe there. That way we could play on European servers, because most of the like top teams were European, and we had to have good practice partners. Sure. So that was kind of the case before a lot of our major events. But other than that, like when we weren't doing that, like scrimming up against like other North American teams that weren't really on the same level of us was almost detrimental to our like player and team skill. So we just played a ton of matchmaking, which we actually all kind of believe in quite a lot. That like playing a lot of matchmaking can really help your team have a lot of success.
When you brought RTZ back into the lineup, did it change how you used him as a player? I mean, obviously, he literally didn't play mid anymore because he had Sumail, but did it change? Did you have like a different philosophy yourself on how to use him as a player?
A little bit. I think that was one of the things we struggled with the most was finding place for both Sumail and Artur in the game. And Artur really wanted to play hard carries, so we tried to transitioning Sumail into maybe kind of less carry-centric mids, and that was just really wasn't the way to go. So eventually we moved back to Sumail playing more kind of carry mids and trying to just kind of run like a dual core where Artur and Sumail are both playing carries. Eventually the team disbanded before we totally got it figured out, I think. But I think we were close to maybe figuring it out at least a little bit.
What did you actually think of how RTZ played when he was on that first secret team, the one with S4, etc.? What did you think of how he worked in the meta at the time?
I think he worked really, really well. I think that team was very, very good and very, very dominant for a lot of the right reasons. It was very surprising to see them kind of slip up at TI5 and not do as very well because they looked like they were untouchable for all summer long.
Because one of the things I've noticed about RTZ is like even when his teams, like a couple of them obviously haven't done that well at some TIs, etc., it hasn't been the case necessarily that he looked like he was the one failing, like he's often looked like he's still pretty well in the games. But I have to also add in that he is nearly always playing like the heroes he wants to and the ones that he really seems to like, etc. So when I look at this EG lineup, the one where he was trying to coexist with Sumail, it seemed like Sumail was the one who suffered more from that. It seemed like he was the one who was like pushed out of his comfort zone a little bit, or maybe just the lack of not having fear playing however he used to play. What do you think of the dynamic in that sense?
That was definitely the case. We were catering to Artur's play style more so than we were catering to Sumail's. We were kind of forcing change on Sumail when that probably wasn't the best play. It might have been better to maybe kind of have Artur change a little bit more than have Sumail change entirely. So maybe Sumail in that regard is a more polarizing player than Artur is, and we probably should have stuck to that idea sooner.
Okay, because I actually had a question in that sense about RTZ, since you've played with him for so long and obviously played against him as well, so you have kind of like a unique perspective. Is he someone where, like, has he changed over the years? Like, will he now like change up what he does and what he plays more for the team? Or is he someone where he kind of like has to play the way he wants to play? Because I get the sense, just as a pure outsider, I don't know the guy, obviously. He seems someone to me, like almost like sort of like a savant, Like I don't know that he could necessarily break down on a chalkboard with a piece of chalk what he's doing and why he's doing something that works. But it almost feels like he just plays off intuition or something. So with some of those players, I can understand why you have to kind of just let them do what they want to do sometimes, because how else are they going to play in a sense? What was your take on him as a player?
I think Artur and Sumail both kind of operate at a level that's just better and faster than most people do, and them being able to kind of put those ideas and play style into words is very hard for them. I think it'd be hard for anyone to do. So that's part of the idea, is you kind of have to trust them and enable the way they want to play, and then hopefully they can like carry the team and you can have a lot of success based off that. Artur has always been like that, and I think he's still like that. You watch him play on stream, and he's always like, no matter how bad a game's doing, he's doing relatively well because he's playing at a different speed than everyone else is.
So for like literally 3 years now, RTZ's been touted as like one of the best players in the world. Depends if you read r/Dota, he was just the best player in the world at all times if you read that website. But he's clearly very, very good player. Why has RTZ never won the international?
Well, I think it does come down to a lot of luck as well. But I mean, obviously, like I think he has like third place and then 8th place and then like 16th. So not like the two best results for the last 2 years. Obviously, very disappointing. I don't know. I think he's made like a lot of poor decisions when it comes to who he's on a team with. So I really hope that he kind of rides this team out, because I think it's like a really good group of guys, and I think that they can definitely do very, very well, and if not, like even like push for kind of first place if they can figure out how to beat OG. So yeah, I hope he rides it out. I think he's going to. So I'm optimistic about it. This team is different because back when I was on the team, I was always kind of clashing heads almost on purpose to kind of push the team. And the new team is like very much like a unit, and they don't really like get in each other's faces too much about things. They just kind of accept everything as like a team problem and treat it as such, which is probably a healthier dynamic, but may or may not prove like the same success. So we'll have to wait and see.
So I asked that question in like a very naive way, I didn't put any context on it just to see what you would say. But if I actually look at the history of Dota 2, a trend I've actually noticed, which is interesting, is that it's not really like the carry players that like, shape the whole world and like they just win all the championships and everyone else is like hopping on their train and like, oh, I've got to just play with this guy to win. If you actually look at most of the history of the game, despite the fact they are the flashy players and the ones who, very much like carry the game to victory, etc., it is like the captains who where the success seems to follow them around. I mean, you've obviously had a lot of success in your career. Poppy's like I think he's like, what was the first player to win the 2 Valve events. Zhao 8's obviously been everywhere and somehow always made his teams work. What is it about Dota, you think, that the captain has such a massive influence?
I think it's such a strategy-based game. And like strategy and drafting is so important. I think that the two people we haven't mentioned are Fly and No Tail from OG. Like I've been super impressed what they've been able to do over the past 2 years, but because before OG, I think that a lot of people felt like Fly and No Tail weren't really maybe the best players, but they're proving very differently now. Spending all that time on like Fnatic and then C9, and Fly was on Complexity for TI5. So it's like it's really cool to see like such smart players have a ton of success because they just get it. They learn what it takes to win, and they're able to kind of give that knowledge and share that knowledge with their teammates and kind of set themselves up for success by utilizing their teammates almost as like tools, I guess, is the way I would word it.
So when I outlined, like when you had the second RTZ era, I like the way they're actually like actual eras disguised beyond the teams. Like we're in the third one now, the third age of RTZ. Okay. So when you're in the second RTZ era, like I said, the actual results on paper look great, but like I say, if you're losing to all these different teams and you're not winning that many tournaments, especially not the majors, it's understandable why, something might change. But if the other one was a little bit of a shock, like when RTZ first left or the way he left, the second one was ridiculous, right? Where it just like overnight, everything just changed between Secret and Evil Geniuses.
The second one was bullshit, to be honest. It was really stupid. I was very, very upset. I was pissed. Yeah, that was rough because like I said, once again, we're in a position where we had no great options. I felt like maybe we could have done something with Bulba and Ali, but it just turns out it didn't work out. In hindsight, maybe we should have put Fear on carry and had Ali play support again, but both of them were kind of like the role that they were playing at the time and weren't really willing to switch it up. But yeah, that kind of change was very unwarranted. And like I said before, it was definitely like players were giving up, but they were also kind of pushed by Valve's deadline on roster changes.
Sure,
so.
Yeah. Okay, even though you do add in that caveat, that I agree, yeah, the problem obviously is with the roster lock. It means that, yeah, it's not just that they make the decision last minute, but then you have no choices yourself. That is a knock-on effect. But that's why I'm actually kind of shocked that you took RTZ in for the third time after that. Like, listen, I might hold a grudge at that point in time if that happened the second time over. Like, how did you ever get over that?
Well, I'm not a part of the team anymore, so it's not really much of my concern, to be completely honest. The team roster is totally decided based on what the players want to do, and as I'm not a player or like have like an active part in the Dota team anymore, that's not really my say at all. So if the guys wanted to play with him, then it's totally up to them. And if they feel like they can have success with him, everyone wants to win. I think that's the main goal of everyone. So if they feel like their best chances to win are playing with RTZ, then they should absolutely do so.
Sure. What did you actually think? Here's the thing, taking all personal things and how it kind of did screw EG last minute, taking all that out of the equation, was there a logic to like, finally the EternalEnvy Artor lineup will occur in Dota? Was there a logic to why they wanted to do it, do you think?
Yeah, I felt like there was. I mean, it's always been Envy kind of whispering to our tour. That's kind of the way these Dota shuffles go down. At the first time, what were we calling him, like year one or era one RTZ or era one RTZ? Like there was just Puppy and like Kuro whispering in our tour's ears and Zai's ears for 15 months, and then finally got them to leave. And then it was, Envy whispering in our tour's ear for Envy and Puppy, once again whispering in their ears for telling them like, oh, like come play with us, like we'll be unstoppable, kind of a thing. And you can just tell people whatever they want to hear, and then the grass is kind of greener effect doesn't always take place. So yeah, that's the kind of way I look at that. I guess what was your original question? Sorry.
That makes sense. You kind of answered there. So here's the problem: is like, if this was a movie, it's okay. I'd write this third act, so it would be like just like the other one. Again, you're pushed into a corner, but you come up with some crazy, like, you get those guys in. You succeed, obviously, in the movie. You do beat Secret. In fact, Secret's your rival. They don't bomb as well, and eventually you all go on. You win TI again, but obviously this was the worst era. The Bulba era. Like, this is where in your career. I mean, you said before, to you, anything except winning was failure, like coming third or something was enough to, as we've seen in the past, to break teams up, So having like 3 tournaments where you weren't even making top 4, this must have been tough to deal with.
It was very tough to deal with, and I think that after winning TI5, I became more okay. Like I said, I was saying earlier, it was a lot easier to lose. So I think like getting top 3 for me was like almost good enough. Like I wasn't like visibly upset as I had been in the past, which is like maybe part of the reason why I didn't have the same kind of drive to win post TI5. But yeah, playing with this like era with Bulba and Aoi for like this, it was like with 2-3 months or whatever it was. It was just it wasn't what we wanted, and it just didn't work for whatever reason. I think that there was like, first off, we had like 3 or 4 people on that team that had their own ideas about how Dota should be played. And we had just like our level of play just wasn't high enough to kind of match the expectations we set for ourselves.
Like you'd said earlier on, that there probably always is a way, within a meta you can sort of figure things out and sort of get it. Did an idea ever start to emerge at any point in time, how you should have been playing, or what the best style for that team was looking back now?
Yeah, no, we definitely had a lot of great ideas, and it was like people, if you ask all the other teams before middle and major, I think they were genuinely surprised that we did so poorly, because we were winning scrims. We were winning. Our practice was going amazingly. Like we were doing very, very well against all of the top teams. And like Liquid, for example, like that was a team like we were beating in scrims. Like we were one of the teams that Liquid is afraid of. And you look at that tournament, you see EG, and like that wouldn't be the case. Like you would never think that, but that was the case, and it just didn't like. We just choked. Like we literally just went in to our official matches and we played significantly worse than we had ever played before, and that is not how you win major tournaments. So a change was necessary, kind of like at whatever cost.
Sure. So I actually feel in a weird way like it's almost fortuitous for you that Secret also just bombed so badly, and then they had such big egos. They're obviously going to have their own issues, because if that doesn't happen, the road isn't open to make this blockbuster move just before TI, and then that's kind of like, that could be like a depressing end to your career. Do you ever wonder during this Bulba period when it was going so badly, like, am I going to have to go to TI with this lineup and bomb the tournament?
Yeah, that was like part of the things. Like we were doing this like kind of divestment from Twitch into like this new EG, and that was an active process since like spring of 2016. So it was definitely something that I was constantly dealing with, and it was also like being with this new lineup with Aoi and Bulba, where we weren't really having the same success that I had before. I became very okay with the idea of not playing Dota after TI6, and going into TI6 with the new lineup and doing as well as we did, which I think that maybe we didn't really expect to do. I mean, we went from last place in Manila Major to 3rd place at TI. Like we probably should have at least gotten 2nd, to be completely honest. It kind of like re-inspired me to want to play more. But during that time, I was like totally okay with like not playing Dota that seriously, because it was so stressful and so annoying to deal with. Like having this like our tour +1 leave every year. and just kind of fuck everything up.
Yeah, sure. So when RTZ and actually Universe obviously returned to the team, and you got this TI6 lineup, but because of the timing of when it happened, you had to go through the qualifiers to get there, and as a result, play a bunch of online games, etc. What was that whole thing that you got into where it was like some sort of beef between you and the OG coach, where it was about like NA in Europe or something like that? Can you remember what I'm talking about?
Can you repeat that one more time? Sorry.
The guy who's the OG coach, fucking mad.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, what was the beef between you and him? I forget the detail. Wasn't it like you were just arguing over like whether Europe's better than NA or something?
Yeah, he was just like talking about, because the North American qualifiers were kind of a joke because all the teams had made roster changes, so we had no kind of like stable teams to invite to the actual qualifiers. So they ended up inviting like 2 teams that, you know, didn't change their roster. They didn't break Valve's kind of roster break rule. Yeah. So Valve had kind of no really choice but to invite them based on the fact that they were more just like teams that didn't change their rosters because everyone had changed their roster. And so like these teams were like total jokes. Like they were totally out of their league in this qualifier. And he made a comment saying like, why is this team here? Like NA qualifiers are so easy. Like this is silly. And I was just like, you can't just like run your mouth all the time. So I just called him out. I had to represent North American Dota. I had to have their back.
Because that's the only part I didn't understand. I thought you were implying that you thought NA Dota was better than Europe, whereas at the time,
no.
So many of the European players were at the top of the scene, you know.
It was hypocritical because he had come over in the past and tried to play in North America with North American players and try to play in all these qualifiers, and he had done it and he didn't really have the kind of success that he wanted to have, and then just kind of left and went back, and he doesn't even like actively play anymore. And for someone to just kind of like open their mouth and talk shit because they're coaching one of the most successful teams at the time is just like total bullshit to me. Like, you're a coach, like sure you have an impact on the game, but like you don't have that big of an impact on the game. Like you don't like automatically, now that you know you have an entire career of not winning anything, and then you coach a team who wins something, and then all of a sudden you're allowed to like open your mouth and talk shit. Like, that's not how it works.
Okay. So when you had this situation where you got Zai back into the team, this is an interesting storyline, because obviously if anyone didn't know anything about Dota and they were listening, they're like, oh yeah, I remember that name earlier in the interview. Where did he disappear to? So he just went off into the wilderness somewhere, thought to be gone forever, you know. How the hell did he come back? That makes it sound like that scene in the movie, you know, where you go out to the log cabin on the helicopter and you land and you tell him it's one last mission, you've got to come back and do it, you know, to save the world. How did that move come back?
So Zai kind of had a rough year. You know, he left with our tour and went to Secret for 2015, and they kind of bombed out of TI and placed well below their expectations. And he had signed up for kind of like the advanced kind of like last year of his high school, and he had to commit, you know, a lot of time to it. So right after the Manila major, his school had ended, and he was like, you know, like, oh, I'd love to like play in an open qualifier team and see how we do. And it just so happened that we were going to be playing in the open qualifier this time around. So we were very lucky to kind of have him join our team. It was, you know, us and Secret both doing very, very poorly. He had the kind of choice between the two teams and where he wanted to go. And I think that in the end, Universe just decided to join our team based on the idea that Zai was coming to our team. So Secret kind of got Secret kind of got fucked up there, but it worked out for us. So I'm happy and grateful for his plays at TI and him coming back to the team and really bailing us out.
Okay, and since you've set up the context here that because of the poor results and then also what was going on with the business side of Evil Genius as well, you already at least had it in mind. Like, it's not like you were planning like, yo, I definitely won't win this tournament and then I'll just retire and all, you know, but it's like you were prepared that this could be an eventuality one day. What do you think of this as your last tournament then? To still have a very good finish and still be in with a chance, you know?
I would have liked to got second. I think that we were better than DC. Which is why I kind of have that's kind of why the tournament has left us with kind of like a sour taste in our mouth, is just because like we felt like we definitely should have been in the final, and maybe I don't know if we should have beat Wings, but maybe we could have. So that's like the unfortunate part of everything, it being like my last kind of tournament. But it is nice to, you know, get that kind of top 3, win, you know, a ton of money, and kind of have this like, I got third, first, and then third, which is like really cool and really awesome, and it's a nice story to have. So totally kind of cool to retire out on top. I think Fear has like a better story of him being like his last game ever, playing Terrorblade, and he had like a Divine Rapier, and he had like he didn't even die the entire game, and we still lost. Like he just like went out and just like his last game like lost with like it all out on the line kind of a thing. So
okay, so over your career, I mean, we've kind of touched on it before, but like you've essentially self-styled yourself as like the China killer, because obviously a lot of the Western teams at different points in time had difficulty with some of the, especially the very, very good Chinese teams at the different meta points. Why have you been sort of the counter to them? What do you think fits for them in terms of how you think about the game or how your teams have worked?
I don't know. I think I just looked at the game. I've always looked at the game from like a very outward perspective. I've been able to look at the game and kind of analyze it as like more big picture. And I think that's what I saw the Chinese teams doing and what I saw them having success with, made sense to me and why they were doing it. But I also felt like there was very easy ways to kind of exploit it. I felt like a lot of the Chinese teams were very predictable, and they were all very similar to each other. And that in turn just kind of led us to developing a play style and a lot of confidence when we went up against these Chinese teams in major tournaments.
So I saw an interview from a while back where you said that when you were describing like the different roles in your team and what people's personalities were like, and like who decides what you generally do in the team and the order of things, all you said about Zai was that most of the time he just said nothing. He'd just play the game, but then every now and then it's like it reminded me of that thing of like the people where, because they never speak, the second they speak, like everyone just like, whoa, what's he saying? And then it's like you have everyone's ear instantly. And you said like anytime you would like pipe up with something, it would always be some like next level like pick or ban that you like actually it's a really good idea and it's come out of nowhere. Is this how your relationship was like with him in the team?
Yeah, no, that's definitely, there's a lot of truth to that. Although, I mean, even though sometimes I would suggest really kind of clowny and off the wall things that we didn't really go with, occasionally he would mention something that would just be like pure genius. And we were like, that makes so much sense here. Like, let's do that. And then all of a sudden we're super confident that we have outdrafted our opponents and we're going to win this game and all good things moving.
Can you think of an example? Is there like a good one that sticks in your mind?
I know that at Star Ladder, when we played up against Secret in the grand finals, in like game 5, they had a Medusa, and he was like, let me just play support Nyx. And it was something that we hadn't really done before, and we wasn't really on the table until he mentioned it, which is something that was very uncharacteristic of Zai to do. But it definitely helped us out, and it was a huge part in the reason why we won that game and that tournament.
Okay. What do you, since he is such a quiet individual, and then especially as the only real like presence he has when he does streaming, etc., is when he seems to almost be like trolling, it's hard for people from the outside to know what he's like as a person and as a teammate, But as a player, I mean, we've already described he's obviously a very versatile player. And he seems to be very clutch as well. What do you think? How do you think he thinks about the game?
I think we probably think about the game a little bit more similarly than I could guess. I think that like a lot of the players that have been on EG have all kind of the same idea about how Dota is played and how communication is handled and how to go about having good teamwork. That just comes from time playing together. But for Zai, I think that he is, very quiet, but like knows what he needs to do to be successful in the game, and he doesn't really let other people's kind of stuff get in his way. That's the great thing about him, is like if somebody's, he knows what he needs to do to be successful, and if somebody is really doing something that's preventing him from doing it, he's not afraid to speak up and say it, whereas other players in his position, usually the quieter player won't really say, but he knows when to speak up at the right time.
When Zai left that first time, I could almost understand it in as much as he clearly had like a link with RTZ, and like the idea was like they were going to go to a new team, etc. But the one that really shocked me was Universe leaving, because I actually always looked at EG and I thought, right, well, the three obvious people who should be on this team forever is Fear, PPD, and Universe. They all seem to have a similar temperament and certain mindset of wanting to win and do whatever you need for the team, versatility, blah blah blah, all the rest of it. Like that must have been an especially shocking component when he left the team.
Yeah, groups are dangerous. Like it's a lot easier to kind of go against everything that has characterized you as like a person when you have someone else to do it with. So not to put all the blame on Artur, and I know that like Universe is definitely like, he made his own decision, he made his own bed kind of a thing. So at the end he needs to be at peace with the decision he made. But I don't know, like he felt like he was doing what was best for himself, and I never can get upset with someone for doing that. He felt like he would have more success playing for Secret than he would playing for EG without Artur. I don't think he saw us finding a very good replacement for Artur, which was definitely the case. And he just he felt like Secret was going to do better than EG. So that's about all there is to say about that, I think.
Okay, this is going to sound a bit conflicted, okay? Because it's going to sound on the one hand like I'm praising him, and on the other hand like it's a diss, okay? Because when Universe was in Evil Geniuses, he did look like what a unique player, such a vital role within the team. You always used to call him underrated, etc., because obviously a lot of the acclaim went over to, like the RTZs of the world, etc., the Sumails. But then the thing is, as a result of that, there's like a famous thing I've noticed as a trend in communities, which is when someone's underrated, but they become known for being underrated, it's like people say they're underrated so much. It's like they almost become overrated in that sense, because everyone just says it all the time. Well, when he then left to go and play in Secret, I in my mind was like, right, let's see if he's really like the god tier offlaner who could just he can just play it where no one else can play and do it. This is going to be interesting. Let's see what happens in Secret. And I have to say, that was a fucking nightmare when he played in Secret. Like, how do we take an overall average, an overall picture of Universe in his career? Because obviously playing in Evil Geniuses benefited him, right? Something about the way that team worked. Or Secret was just that terrible. I don't know. You tell me.
I think it was a little bit of both. I think that team had a very different play style, and he was under brand new leadership. He was dealing with totally different minds. He was playing with both Puppy and Envy, two players he had really never played with in the past, and he was trying to make this transition. He had been playing with me on EG for almost 2 years at that 2.5 years at that point. So it was just probably very different on that team, and I know that like their farm priority was like totally out of whack, having both Envy and Artur, and then Universe on top of it, who actually does like farm a little bit. Doesn't play like the totally like self-sacrificing offlaner that they would probably need to have success on that team. So it's probably just I think it was a nice little wake-up call for him, which is part of the reason why he was so eager to come back to EG after they also kind of bombed out of the Manila Major.
I mean, if we add all those like that theory crafting together, do you think that's also part of the reason why Universe was fantastic in some of the EG lineups? Because obviously the EG lineups with Fear, he's going to get a little bit more room than perhaps to farming. I mean, there's not just two people who just demand all the farming, basically.
Yeah, we definitely had a recipe for at least some kind of success on this team. We knew, exactly what it took to enable our players and able for Universe to find success in his games. So you definitely had a lot easier time of figuring out like what he needs to do and how to do it when he was playing with our team.
Okay, when I read an old comment, this is from quite a while ago, but it was when you were in Evil Geniuses for the first year. When you were talking about Fear, you had a really interesting way of describing, because you said this, okay, you said many of the older players are often labeled as experienced, but Fear is something else. The type of experience that he exudes is very unique. Like, how would you describe him as someone that you've obviously been in a team with him for a long time now? What has he brought to the team? What's been different about him as a player? Have there been challenges playing with him?
I haven't had any challenges playing with Fear, I think. He's always been like very level-headed and very cool about every situation, and I think that he probably sees like the bigger picture of team dynamics and how teams get along a lot differently than most people do. Like, he's able to say like, hey, like, you shouldn't talk to that person this way. Instead, you should talk to him this way. And I think that's one of his greatest skills, is kind of that interpersonal kind of teammate communication and knowing how to help people get along and make sure that we're not like holding grudges or keeping stuff from each other. Maybe a little bit of a vague answer, but let's see. He was just like, it wasn't just his like incredible experience in Dota and all the years that he played. He had this like overwhelming kind of game knowledge and theories about how to play the game. It was more so just kind of like what he knew about winning and losing that made our team stronger over the years.
I mean, the first part of your answer there is interesting because I noticed that that's something I think has tied into one of my own theories about evil geniuses, which is I've noticed in esports games that everyone just makes the guy who was the tactical leader the leader full stop. Like they go, right, you're the captain, you're the leader, that means you just do everything. Now, if you notice in a lot of like companies and a lot of teams in other sports, you know, they divide up responsibilities. So say someone is fantastic at, I mean, shot calling, being the point guard, whatever it might be. Yeah, he does that role, but there might be someone else who's like the emotional leader, who's like the locker room leader. You know, usually that's what they call the captain. You know, the captain isn't always the guy who makes the actual in-game decisions. But in esports games, probably because people are so young, they tend to put all the responsibility just onto that guy. And the problem is, in some people's case, like I think it seems like in your case, maybe they're not the most charismatic guy in the world. They're not the guy who knows how to reach every single person emotionally and connect with them and all that sort of thing. So has fear been important in that respect? Because it seems like he's kind of been like the bigger brother role in some of these teams.
Absolutely. I think now that you say that, it kind of makes me think about what made Fear so good in that role. And I think it was his empathy, him being able to empathize and kind of put himself in my teammates' shoes throughout everything and making sure that, you know, kind of he was almost keeping me in check, you know, like making sure that like, hey, don't talk to somebody like that, or like maybe you should say this to that person. And not that he was kind of like back channeling or anything like that. He was just like making sure that we were all focused on what was important, and that was winning. And that's something I've always struggled with, is empathy. So he's definitely been super helpful in that regard, to kind of like be like my teammate for so many years, to have him like have his resources at being able to utilize him as in that regard has been like super beneficial for us.
In the classic EG lineup that won the international, when he was playing the carry position in this team, it was obviously a very unique way to play this position. You know, I mean, if he had certain heroes, yeah, he could carry the game, but otherwise, it was much more like unselfish than a lot of players who naturally would play it. How would you describe how he was as a carry player when you used him?
Well, we were playing around Sumail entirely at that point. Sumail and Owie, those were our two focal points. And then Fear would kind of play whatever we needed to win the game. So a lot of our focus was on Fear, you know, having a good early game and then moving immediately out of lane, so that way Owie could start farming on his 4 position. So that was kind of like one of our biggest theories about how to play the game at that point, and how to enable Owie to have success. And Fear would kind of almost rotate into like Sumail would still be 1, and Owie was almost like our second farmer, because Fear was all of a sudden like this like farmed like early game carry who was helping out and making sure that Sumail and Universe had a good game, and we just kind of left Owie alone to do his thing.
When you kicked out Owie and you put Fear into the 4 position, like obviously the team itself had its ups and downs at that period of time. But what did you make of how he played when he played in that time?
I think Fear played great. I think he's always played great, even in that 4 position. You know, he's super dedicated. You know, he was like spamming. I think he lost like 700 MMR or something just by like only playing support heroes and matchmaking. But he knew that like, that's what he needed to do in order to win, and that's always been the most important thing to Fear. So no better teammate out there.
Since you've had so many teammates that we can use that, I mean, it's a very all-encompassing term, but like versatile, like, you know, they can do a lot of things. Essentially, like a lot of them are unique, you know, they aren't just playing one position or one role or one set of heroes necessarily. How have you viewed your own role within the team? Like, it seems as though for most of your career, you've played a pretty much like a straight up pure support.
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the greatest kind of strengths that I bring to a team is, what's the word? My ability to facilitate ideas and communication, to be able to take all the information that I'm absorbing from my teammates and turn that into a game plan, or turn that into a strategy, or turn that into the kind of a way that we draft. I've been able to kind of connect all of these great ideas that come from all of my amazingly skilled and talented teammates. So I think that's kind of what I've brought that's very different than most people to our team over the years.
Is there a certain type of player, not for like your overall teams, but for you in game, is there a certain type or a style of player that seems to work better with you, do you think?
I think somebody that's able to explain the things that they do and why they do them is very important and very useful for me, because, you know, I can watch someone play and try to figure out why they do exactly what they do. But if they can't tell me what they're doing and why they're doing it, then there's no way I can use that information to help our team be successful. So I really just need to kind of have like all the cards out on the table, so that way I can just use everything to our benefit.
I've noticed almost every time there's been an interview or an AMA and people bring up the topic of like, oh, are you the best drafter, etc., you almost seem to play it off as if like, well, there isn't really, you know, a best drafter, because it depends what that guy has in his team and then what the meta is, you know. Like, now that you're retired, in theory, were you the best drafter? Were you the best in your era, at least?
Tough to say if I was the best. I definitely think I was top 3. A lot of the drafting that we did on EG was as a team, but there was definitely a lot of ideas that kind of stemmed from my own individual thoughts. And at the end of the day, I did have final say on like what heroes we picked and what heroes we banned. So, I mean, I definitely think that there's some credit to be given there. But it's been, you know, very useful to have teammates that are so good and so talented that make my drafts look good, you know, almost all the time.
I notice in a lot of your career, you always try to emphasize that the reason you were successful is that you were incredibly hardworking. You had a great work ethic and you just battled to do what you could to succeed. Did this actually apply to drafting? Are you someone who spent a lot of time going over games and researching stuff, or do you go a feel? What was it like?
Yeah, we worked really, really hard on our drafting for TI5 and TI6. At TI4, we were all like brand new. Like we had no idea what we were doing. So coming into TI5 and then all of the majors, things definitely changed quite a bit. I think some of the majors in 2015 we are a little less prepared for, but that's just because what I talked about before, us like not taking the game as seriously as we probably should have. We had a lot of distractions, I think, for a majority of us, unfortunately, but you live and you learn. But yeah, I think that we were able to definitely put the time in, and I've always stressed like putting in, you know, hours and hours before any kind of like big major tournament for like every single match. I think it's just so incredibly helpful to at least have some kind of idea of what you're going to do before you sit down in that booth and, you know, get ready to draft your heroes, because so much of that game is dependent on your strategy and the heroes that you're picking.
As a captain and as someone who is definitely, you know, benefiting from the players who play with you, and obviously, you know, it is always team success. I understand all these things. It means that if you ever do an interview, right, and you're an active player and you're the captain, you should generally, if you want your teammates to feel good, say like, you know, I couldn't do anything without my teammates, you know, these guys make me look good. They make it easy, you know. These are all great things to roll off the tongue, you know, because people lap them up, you know, they love it. But if we just go through it like this, okay, so you played with RTZ, but you played without RTZ as well. You had top finishes, you know, you won without him. You even played without Universe at times. You even played without Fear at times. Zai was gone. Sumail obviously was only there part of the time. You have actually been one of the only constants in your own career, and you've pretty much, for your whole career, always had top 4 finishes, always been able to get to finals and stuff. As an individual, do you feel like you didn't like maximize your career, like you did get the most out of it? You did accomplish something on an individual level as well?
For sure. I definitely have some shortcomings, and, you know, like I've kind of almost like vaguely hinted, there's been a couple things that, you know, I do have a couple of regrets along the way. But I do recognize my achievement, and I'm very proud of myself for what I've been able to accomplish over the past 3 years and what's led me to where I am today. A little bit of luck for sure, but a lot of hard work and a lot of dedication. So, you know, very proud of myself, I guess you could say.
So this will sound like a really weird question when I set it up like this. So I counted up, okay, and by my count, you have played at 29 LANs in Dota 2 from the EG era onwards, right? And in 29 LANs, you won 8 of them. Now, winning 8 LANs is pretty good. You know, there's probably not that many players can go up to that kind of mark. But since you finished top 4 at 25 of them, if you're someone who's like obsessed with winning, there must still be, in a weird way, some level of dissatisfaction, right? If so many times you never won, and so many times you were close but then you didn't win, or someone just beat you out. Yeah,
winning TI changed everything for me. I'm not gonna winning TI changed my life, and it changed my perspective on everything. You know, winning, what was it, like $1.2 million or something? It's a very unique experience. And I don't know the best way to describe it, but it was very easy for me to appreciate the little things at that point and not be so focused and so angsty about wanting to win. So a little bit more complacent about those kind of like third place finishes and second place finishes after winning TI.
Okay. Being as you're now in a position where like you've taken over, you're the CEO of EG, and you've still intimated that you might play, and we've seen like you're going to play with this like
we're going to play
semi-pro team. Like how do you balance that going forward? So that's going to be tricky, surely.
Definitely tricky. It's a little. I think that people assume that as a CEO, I have this like really kind of like big job and I'm busy all the time. I think that I definitely have at least some time to kind of do this kind of like almost like a passion project of mine to like play in some Dota tournaments. I don't have like the same typical CEO role that everyone else in this kind of like scene does. You know, we are very fortunate that we're so close with Twitch and we're working with Twitch's representation team, and they handle kind of the hard part of going out there and finding us sponsors and, you know, finding the money that allows us to pay our players' salary and fly them to events and pay for their hotels and everything. And that's not really a job that's on my plate. So I do have quite a bit more time than I think than most other CEOs do.
It is kind of a crazy storyline though, in terms of like how I started the interview with like your past is like people thought like this guy's like, he's like a try hard, he's like too aggressive, he's too salty, you know. It's kind of crazy that you've ended up in this role, right, as like a CEO of a big team.
I mean, it's been a wild 4 years. I definitely would have never guessed this. You know, back when I was just playing in my bedroom, I was just like I was just watching, you know, Evil Geniuses play, you know, StarCraft probably at that time. And I was just like, how cool is it that these guys get to play video games for a living? And then to see myself here in such a short time is just, you know, it's quite the story. I think it's very unique and it's very, very grateful, I guess.
Okay. I've got some kind of like what if questions now to close up. So I've got one for you, which is think of all the great Chinese teams that have been over the period that you were active. Who for you was actually the best of all the Chinese teams during your era?
Wings is unmatchable. I there was a point where we were playing Wings and I was like, we can't beat these guys. They were unbelievably good at that tournament.
Okay.
Everyone else I thought was beatable.
Right. Okay. Is there a player who you never got to play with like officially in like a proper EG lineup where they either could have joined or you wish they could have joined? Is there someone that like you really wish you could have gotten into the team?
I really wanted to play with S4 for a certain amount of time. I really thought that like I would get along with him as a player, and I felt like him kind of like being this like calm and relaxed kind of guy, like he would fit very well into a team of mine. Other than that, I would have liked to play with Miracle. I think he's kind of like that same like kind of Sumail RTZ polarizing figure, and I think that him and I could do wonders together on a Dota team, or could have done wonders together on a Dota team. But there was never really. I was playing with Sumail, so I didn't want to have both Sumail and Miracle really at any point. So if I had lost Sumail and RTZ, then I would love to play with Miracle.
With all these lineups where, you know, like obviously we've seen in the interview, like players going backwards and forwards to EG, but you're always the one who's staying in EG. Was there ever really like a point in time where you might have just left EG and maybe PPD goes and he makes a new team, or he goes and joins someone else's team? Was that ever really on the table?
I think at this kind of roster shuffle where we lost our tour and universe, there was like potentially maybe me not playing for EG because like we didn't really have a lot of great options and everything was kind of a little bit chaotic. But there was never really a time where I was not going to be on this team. We had discussed kind of leaving and making our own brand for quite a while, ever since like 2014. That was kind of one of the thoughts that I had and wanted to do. But it wasn't really kind of like leaving the set of roster. It was just kind of leaving the brand in general, I think was the more realistic option.
Right. At the end of the interview, do you have anyone you want to thank or say hello to?
I want to thank you for giving me this exposure, and hopefully all of your fans and stuff like enjoy this interview. I actually did enjoy it quite a lot. I was a little nervous about what our conversation topics would be, but I'm glad we kept it to Dota and we talked about some cool, interesting things. I want to thank everyone out there who has kind of followed me over these like past like 4 or 5 years. It's been such an incredible and like crazy journey. And I'm excited for playing Dota this upcoming year with my new team Wanted for now, and we're going to be playing in DAC qualifiers at the end of this month, which I'm not incredibly optimistic about, but I hope we do well. But regardless, yeah, thanks everyone for watching. Appreciate it.